Good evening, everyone. My name is Rosie Goldsmith, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Riveter magazine. I'm also director of the European Literature Network. We are publishing tonight our 10th edition of the Riveter magazine, the Italian Riveter. So pick up your free copy. You can also get free copies online at Newsstand, and you can also access the whole magazine as a PDF on our website on the European Literature Network. Now, this evening is a celebration of riveting readings of Italian literature in translation. And the reason we're doing this is because we think that Italian literature has really experienced a boom. And not just in literature as a result of the great, what we call Ferrante effect, which has obviously had an impact on writing and novels and publishing in this country, in the UK, but also because of the much greater visibility of translators from Italian into English and generally. As a result, really, of this boom, it's the whole infrastructure of writing that's really grown, I think, over the last few years. You've got a lot to read in the Italian Riveter. You've got extracts, you've got features, you've got interviews, you've got reviews, you've got poetry. You won't be spoilt for choice, definitely. And tonight we've actually got readings from the magazine, but also readings that people have selected because they want these particular books to be translated into English as well. So the magazine is a platform for everything. It's a platform for new publications, new translations, and it's a way of showcasing what already exists. You're going to hear tonight readings from Cesare Pavese, Natalia Ginsberg, Aldo Busi, Lala Romano, Elena Ferrante, of course, Diego Marani, Nadisha Oyongoda, Daniela Del Giudici, Livia Franchini, Laura Fusco, Mariangela Gualtieri, and Primo Levi. At this stage, I want to thank everyone who's worked on the Italian Riveter with me over the last year, and I also want to thank Mihai Andre and London Video Stories who are filming this, and I want to thank all of you for coming. So enjoy the evening. Thank you. I discovered through editing this magazine, I discovered many, many authors I'd never heard of before. I'd never heard of Lala Romano. Now, you as Italians probably know her. I didn't know her. I was introduced to her by reading the Penguin Book of Italian Short Stories, which was edited by Jhumpa Lahiri. Now, this has been a great treasure trove for me of writing. And Jhumpa Lahiri gave me an exclusive interview, which is in the Riveter magazine. You'll be able to read that. She is, as you know, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. She's American, born in Britain though, and she's known for her short stories and her novels and essays in English. And then she's also a professor of creative writing at Princeton University, and I think it was about 2015 or something, maybe earlier, that she decided that she was going to write only in Italian. She had no links with Italy, nothing. It was the most extraordinary story. And she tells her story to me in the interview in the magazine. And she then went on to edit the Penguin Book of Italian Short Stories. She also writes in Italian. So we've got one of her essays in English, you'll be pleased to hear, if you don't read Italian, in the magazine as well. And I chose the Lala Romano story because Lala Romano, 1906 to 2001, a great Italian novelist, poet, artist, and journalist. And she painted throughout her life, and her house in Milan has been converted into a museum to preserve her work. And we really, really hope that more of her work will be translated, because it isn't yet. This is the only thing I think we've got some short stories, I think that's it. The Lady, by Lala Romano, La Signora. In the hotel dining room, the lady started to observe the gentleman seated at the table across from her, and upon preliminary inspection, surmised that he was interesting. The essential thing, that is to say, the hands, were perfect. The lady never gave a second thought to men who had rough, neglected hands. The man at the opposite table took excellent care of his hands. They were slender, anxious hands, and the noble curve of the nails was free of impurities. His hair was smooth, grey at the temples, and moulded to his round, rather small head. As the lady factored each new element into her analysis, approval mounted in her heart, and her whole being was poised for happiness. The gentleman had finished lunch without raising his head, so the lady hadn't been able to catch his eye. He got up and left the room, not only without glancing at the lady, but without even a nod. For a moment, the morsel of food that the lady had just swallowed stuck in her throat. But she hastened to think that maybe she'd been mistaken, and then she abandoned herself to pleasant daydreams, looking out of the window at the slope of the mountain where small fields of rye seemed to be fleeing below steady gusts of wind. Someone brought the lady a note. The lady had been waiting for it because she hadn't seen Nicola Rossi when she'd arrived on the morning coach. Nicola Rossi apologized for not being there and invited the lady to come up to his hotel. Nicola Rossi was a music critic and a friend of the lady's husband. The whole afternoon, Nicola Rossi talked about the stomach ailment that had kept him from coming to meet her. It was the altitude that gave him this trouble, and unfortunately the pharmacy in town didn't carry effective remedies. Nicola Rossi talked about nothing else all afternoon, and in the evening the lady was grateful to the man at the opposite table for being there. After 3 days, the lady had only managed to make eye contact with the man 2 or 3 times, though she hadn't been able to hold his gaze for even an instant. Later, questioning herself about that look, which had made a distinct impression on her, the lady tried to discern some warmth in it, a flash of kindness or sensuality, but she doubted this had been the case. A certain restlessness began to take root in the lady's spirit, but it was still linked to a subtle joy, owed in part to the sheer difficulty of the undertaking. And yet the lady realized that this particular joy, or rather pleasant excitement, was growing much less spontaneous, so that she had to seek it out, provoke it. And so the joy was turning less vivid, maybe even a little insincere and false. On previous occasions, a unique quality of this joy was that the lady felt it precisely when she exchanged more or less neutral glances or words with the new individual in question. This time, though, the strangest thing was that she couldn't feel joy in the gentleman's presence. Meanwhile, she fell prey to an inexplicable embarrassment that could only be called shyness. That was the strangest thing. The lady was certain, however, that she would regain full control once she could speak. At this point, the lady burned with curiosity to know who the man was and what his profession might be. His anxious hands suggested a pianist or a surgeon. Inventing an excuse, the lady asked to see the hotel register, and all she learned was that the gentleman was 40 years old. The box for profession was left blank. The lady was irked that she'd written on her part, set designer. She gave advice to her architect husband. So now she replaced it with painter, which struck her as less odd. She also regretted having put down her exact age, but she didn't dare correct it. Besides, compared to the gentleman, the lady was still quite young. So it is the most fantastic story. You've got to read the whole thing. It's in the book. So unfortunately, we couldn't print the whole thing, but it's a soupçon. So that is Lalla Romano, and we move on now to Enrica Maria Ferrara. Now, Enrica is going to be reading from Elena Ferrante. And I've got to say, one of the reasons I became so devoted and passionate to Italian literature in translation was because of Ferrante. And that was, I remember the first time I read Ferrante was in 2015, and I was bowled over, and I've read everything since then. And then I met this extraordinary woman called Enrica Maria Ferrara, who's at Trinity College in Dublin, and she teaches Ferrante's studies. She's one of a group of people now across the world who teach Ferrante. And whatever you think of Ferrante, I know that not everybody loves her as much as I do, but there's a lot of amazing, a number of books now, as you know. They are a phenomenon, whichever way we want to look at it. So Enrica, as I say, she teaches Italian at Trinity College. She's written widely about Elena Ferrante, Domenico Starnone, and other leading Italian writers. And she's going to read 2 short readings, and she's going to introduce them herself. And Enrica also has COVID, so she's also online from Dublin.
My name is Enrica Maria Ferrara, and I'm a scholar in Italian studies based in Dublin and originally from Naples. And I'm thrilled to have been asked by the Italian Riveter to read from one of my favorite authors, Elena Ferrante, on which I do research, a lot of research as well. So, Elena Ferrante, the first reading today is from Elena Ferrante's 2002 novel I giorni dell'abbandono, which is in fact the first novel that Anne Goldstein translated into English as The Days of Abandonment in 2005, and Ferrante's second novel. In the novel, a woman named Olga is suddenly abandoned by her husband Mario for a much younger girl. Olga is an aspiring writer who had given up her ambitions to be with her husband and family. Upon hearing the news of her husband, she loses control of herself and experiences a specific type of derangement that Ferrante has described elsewhere as frantumaglia, a shattering of the self, which is the result of patriarchal violence. Olga loses the sense of time and space, is unable to pay attention and care for herself or for others. For example, her son Gianni, who's very ill, and their dog Otto, who's dying. On the top of everything else, she's unable to perform simple tasks like unlocking the new armed door of her apartment. So she's trapped indoors with her children. But at this point, we can see her re-emerging from her miserable state with the help of her daughter Ilaria, a paper cutter, and a hand-to-hand struggle with the door. So let me read this to you. In chapter 31 of The Days of Abandonment. Relearning how to turn a key, for example. Was it possible that Mario, leaving, had taken from my hands that ability? Punctually, Ilaria pricked me, several times, I think, painfully, for I reacted with a start, and she drew back, exclaiming, "You told me to do it." I nodded yes. I reassured her with a gesture. With the other hand, I rubbed the ankle where she had struck me. I tried again to open the door. I couldn't do it. I leaned over. I examined the key closely. Finding the imprint of the old gestures was a mistake. I had to disengage them. Under the stupefied gaze of Ilaria, I brought my mouth to the key, tasted it with my lips, smelled its odor of plastic and metal. Then I grabbed it solidly between my teeth and tried to make it turn. I did it with a sudden jerk, as if I wished to surprise the object, impose a new statute, a different dispensation. Now we'll see who wins, I thought, while a pasty, salty taste invaded my mouth. But I produced no effect, except the impression that because the rotating movement of my teeth and the key wasn't working, it was finding an outlet in my face, tearing it like a can opener, and my teeth were moving, were being unhinged from the foundation of my face, taking with them the nasal septum, an eyebrow, an eye, and revealing the viscid interior of head and throat. I immediately pulled my mouth away from the key. It seemed to me that my face was hanging to one side like the coiled skin of an orange after the knife has begun to peel it. What is there still to try? Lie on my back, feel the cold floor against it, stretch my bare legs against the panels of the door, clasp the soles of my feet around the key, fit its hostile beak between my heels to try again to capture the necessary movement. Yes, no, yes. For a while, I let myself sink into desperation, which would mold me thoroughly, make me metal, door panel, mechanism, like an artist who works directly on his body. Then I noticed on my left thigh, above the knee, a painful gash. A cry escaped me. I realized that Ilaria had made a deep wound. I saw her back off in fear with the paper cutter in her right hand. Are you crazy? I said, turning on her fiercely. You aren't listening to me, Ilaria cried. I'm calling you and you can't hear me. You're doing terrible things. Your eyes are all twisted. I'm going to tell Daddy. I looked at the cut above my knee, the strip of blood. I tore the paper cutter away from her. I threw it toward the open door of the storage closet. That's enough of that game, I said to her. You don't know how to play. Now stay here and be good. Don't move. We're locked in. We're prisoners. And your father will never come to save us. Look what you've done to me. So very, very powerful passage. And yes, it's interesting, and I find it interesting because, like other women in Ferrante's work, Olga realizes that the only way to retake control of reality is to approach it from a different angle that I call posthumanist. She engages with the non-human object, the door, the lock, the key, with all her senses, rather than following rational processes based on a binary understanding of reality. So she becomes metal, mechanism, door panel. She is deeply interconnected with the world around her. At the same time, though, she needs to exercise surveillance, control, and this is the purpose of her daughter Ilaria stabbing her, to avoid falling into traditional patriarchal ways to grapple with knowledge. And so this leads me to the second passage that I would like to read to you, which further illustrates the specific ways of Ferrante's women to understand themselves and the world around. And it's a passage from La Figlia Oscura that was first published in 2006 and wonderfully translated by Anne Goldstein as The Lost Daughter in 2008. Many of you will have seen the wonderfully Unfaithful adaptation by Maggie Gyllenhaal, beautiful movie. In this novel, a woman, Leda, is going on a holiday by herself for the first time. Her grown-up daughters, Bianca and Marta, are with her ex-husband away in Canada, and she looks forward to some peace and quiet. As she's on the beach, she's fascinated by a pair of mother and daughter, Nina and Elena, who play endless games with a doll named Nanny. The doll forms an inseparable trio with the mother and daughter. And Leda develops a morbid interest for the pair, which comes from a mixture of attraction and envy. So that at one point, she does something that is quite bizarre. In fact, is a senseless gesture, as she defines it. She steals the doll. As she goes home after doing that and handles the doll, then she has a sudden flashback involving her own daughters and another doll named Mina. And this is the passage that I will read out to you. Yes. What is a doll to a child? I had had one with beautiful curly hair. I had taken great care of her, had never lost her. Her name was Mina. My mother said that I had given her the name. Mina, Mamina, Mamucha came to mind, a word for doll that hasn't been used for a long time. Play with the Mamucha. My mother had rarely yielded to the games I tried to play with her body. She immediately got nervous. She didn't like being the doll. She laughed, pulled away, grew angry. It annoyed her when I combed her hair, put ribbons in it, washed her face and ears, undressed her, redressed her. I, on the other hand, no. As an adult, I tried to keep in mind the misery of not being able to handle the hair, the face, the body of my mother. So when Bianca was a small child, I patiently became her doll. She dragged me under the kitchen table, it was our playhouse, and made me lie down. I was very tired, I remember. Marta wouldn't sleep at night, only during the day, and then only a little. And Bianca was always around me, full of demands. She didn't want to go to daycare. When I did manage to leave her there, she got sick, complicating my existence even further. Yet I tried to keep my nerves under control. I wanted to be a good mother. I lay on the floor, let myself be cared for as if I were sick. Bianca gave me medicine, brushed my teeth, combed my hair. Sometimes I fell asleep, but she was little and didn't know how to use the comb. And when she pulled my hair, I started and woke. I felt my eyes tearing with pain. I was so desolate in those years. I could no longer study. I played without joy. My body felt inanimate, without desires. When Marta began to howl in the other room, it was almost a liberation. I got up, rudely cutting off Bianca's game, but I felt innocent. It wasn't I who was leaving my daughter. It was my second born who was tearing me away from the first. I have to go to Marta. I'll be right back. Wait. She would begin crying. It was in a moment of feeling generally inadequate that I decided to give Mina to Bianca. It seemed to me a fine gesture, a way of relieving her envy for her little sister. So I fished the old doll out of a cardboard box on the top of the wardrobe and said to Bianca, "See, her name is Mina. This was Mama's doll when she was little. I'm giving her to you." I thought she would love her. I was sure she would devote herself to her as she had devoted herself to me in our games. Instead, she put her aside. She didn't like Mina. She preferred an ugly rag doll with stringy yellow yarn hair her father had brought as a present from somewhere or other. I was hurt. One day, Bianca happened to be playing on the balcony. It was a place she really liked. As soon as spring arrived, I would leave her there. I didn't have time to take her outside, but I wanted her to have air and sun, even if the noise of the traffic and a strong smell of exhaust arose from the street. I hadn't been able to open a book for months. I barely slept. I was exhausted and angry. There was never enough money. I found Bianca sitting on Mina as if she were a chair, and meanwhile playing with her doll. I told her to get up right away. She mustn't ruin something that was dear to me from my childhood. She was really cruel and ungrateful. I called her ungrateful and yelled. I think I yelled that giving her the doll had been a big mistake. She was my doll and I would take her back. How many things are done and said to children behind the closed doors of houses? Bianca was already a cool character. She's always been like that, swallowing up anxieties and feelings. She remained sitting on Mina, measuring her words, the way she still does when she declares her wishes, as if they were her last. No, it's mine. Then I gave her a nasty shove. She was a child of 3, but at that moment she seemed older, stronger than me. I tore Mina away from her, and finally her eyes showed fear. I discovered that she had taken off the doll's clothes, even her little shoes and socks, and had scribbled all over her from head to foot with markers. It was a disfigurement that could be corrected, but to me, it seemed without remedy. Everything in those years seemed to me without remedy. I, myself, was without remedy. I hurled the doll over the railing of the balcony. I saw her fly toward the asphalt and felt a cruel joy. She seemed to me, as she fell, an ugly creature. I stood leaning against the railing for I don't know how long, watching the cars that passed over her, mutilating her. Then I realized that Bianca too was watching, on her knees, with her forehead pressed against the bars of the railing. I picked her up. She let herself be held, yielding. I kissed her for a long time. I hugged her as if I wanted to take her back into my body. "You hurt me, Mama. You're hurting me. I left Eleanor's doll on the sofa, lying on her back, belly up. So you will agree with me that this is another very powerful passage. Again, there is a dimension that I will call post-humanist. The handling of the stolen doll in Leda has triggered what Rosi Braidotti, who's a famous post-humanist scholar, would call nomadic memories of loss and grief, which will help the protagonist come to terms with their complex feelings towards motherhood. In essence, she wanted to be a good mother. That was all she wanted, but ended up being a bad one by societal standards because, to simplify, she was not good at being a doll, objectified, manipulated like a doll. So the close interaction with the non-human object, the doll, like it happened with the door in the days of abandonment, is a crucial way to acquire this knowledge for the protagonist and for all of Ferrante's subjects, really, a knowledge that I call post-humanist. So I hope you enjoyed the reading today, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Well, I think you'll agree that was really fantastic, and excuse the indulgence of a nice long reading to start with, but I think Ferrante and Ferrara are definitely worth it, both from Naples. So thank you to Enrica Maria Ferrara. Now, we have a real live author with us now from London via Italy, Daniele Di Rossi. Thank you very much. Now, Daniele, you have chosen a reading for us from the Riveter.
Yes.
But tell us, first of all, a little bit about yourself.
About myself, yes. I'm a scientist by training. I actually am a biologist. And I initially moved to London to work at Guy's Hospital as a biologist. But then I sort of gradually gave up research and started writing, which was sort of my hidden passion. And I've so far published 2 novels. And the first is more an historic novel based on a story of a 16th century anatomist. And the second one is more a contemporary novel about a mother and child.
And they've been published in English?
No, unfortunately not. No, just
so
in
tell
Italian.
us their names and if there are publishers out there watching.
The first one is Nel cuore dell'anatomista, so in the anatomist's heart, and the second one is Non sono stato io, I didn't do it.
Excellent. Now, you have chosen a really interesting reading. I mean, they're all obviously very interesting. They wouldn't be in the magazine if they weren't. But I was really intrigued as to why you chose this one from the magazine.
Yes.
Tell me the story.
No, the story, I was really fascinated by the section that you call the New Italians. And I actually grew up in Torino, and when I was growing up, so northern Italy, northern industrial city, when we were talking about migrants, immigrati, we were mainly referring to southern Italian coming to northern Italy to work. And Italy was Italians were immigrants, or were people migrating abroad to work, so there were virtually very, very, very few foreigners actually coming to live and work in Italy. And this has completely changed in the last years, and I find it fascinating and beautiful. And I can still remember the first time I was in Milano in the subway, and I heard a Chinese girl and probably an Afro-Italian boy speaking with a very strong Milanese accent, and I was sort of taken aback. It was the first time. Something which is completely normal in London or Paris was completely new in Italy. So I was actually fascinated to discover this section in
and this is La Rue Semidité.
Semidité, and actually I was visiting my daughter in Milano, and she lives in what is now sort of called Chinatown in Milano, so Via Paolo Sarpi, and so I thought that I was meant to read this because I.
It's true. When I emailed you and I contacted you about what you were going to read, you said, "Well, I'm actually in Milan with my daughter in Chinatown, and this is what I've got to read."
Absolutely, and I also think I could sort of relate. She's not a fiction writer. I mean, she's a professor of economy in the Università Cattolica in Milano, and she has this sort of very dry, almost clinical prose, very crystal clear, which I actually could relate to. Probably being an ex-scientist, and she sort of recounts the first months of the pandemic, seen from the Chinese-Italian perspective, which I thought was very interesting.
It's certainly it's a wonderful piece of writing,
it is.
And it's very original, and you're going to read from it now. It's translated by Alex Valenti.
After the 2011 pedestrianization of the main road, Via Paolo Sarpi, and the opening of the new metro stations, the entire neighborhood had undergone a wide-ranging revitalization. A few Chinese wholesale shops remain open. Their presence had been the cause of tensions with local Italian residents, leading to a handful of protests led by Chinese business owners in 2007. But many others changed their main activity. Trendy new shops and businesses appeared, opened by both Italian and second-generation entrepreneurs. They sold soft drinks, dumpling, noodles, and dishes more elaborate than traditional Chinese cuisine, but usually associated with cheap prices and poor quality. You could find vendors with small crates of snacks or traditional products along the street. Among them was a man who'd carried his wares around on his bicycle. At the weekend or over the holidays when I was home, I often hear him ride by and ring his bell yelling, "Fresh corn, zongzi, ling pi." I bumped into him a couple of times, a 40-year-old man with a small mustache and a cap. More than by his products, I was fascinated by meeting the man whose voice I could hear from the window. I never bought anything, but I did greet him a couple of times. He always looked at me in confusion, unsure whether we actually knew each other or not. The neighborhood, by then, had become a culinary destination and an area popular with leisurely strolls, even earning in recent years the praise of the media, who spoke of its vibrant colors and peaceful multicultural coexistence. Admittedly, there was no full integration between the Chinese and Italians, and what there was mainly on business level, but the tensions in 2007 were far behind everyone. The urban revitalization of Paolo Sarpi also came, however, with negative effects. House prices had risen, threatening to force out the neighborhood's historical residents, both Italians and Chinese. The biggest event of the year, which brought the largest crowd from Milan and several other cities, was the Lunar New Year celebration. In 2020, the main celebration should have taken place on Sunday, February the 2nd. Preparation had been going on for weeks, and Via Paolo Sarpi had been adorned with red lanterns since Christmas. With the epidemic exploding in China, however, fear was already making its way through that city. People were starting to avoid the Chinese neighborhood. The event organizer thought that, given the virus was at its peak in China, it would be best to cancel the celebration in solidarity with Chinese population. All the lanterns were taken down. The neighborhood fell into a surreal silence. It almost felt as though the relaxed, lively vibe that had been created over the years had suddenly been put on pause. A suspended atmosphere in which the Chinese shops closed and the main street emptied completely. I no longer heard the street vendor's voice from my window.
As Daniela said, that is actually in the section that we call New Italians, and that's also the title of an essay that's been written for us by Clarissa Botsford, who is the most fantastic translator from Italian, lives in Rome and teaches Italian writing as well. Clarissa's also written a postcard, which is another feature of the magazine. We have postcards from various cities throughout the magazine, and she's written her postcard from Rome, and her essay, if you're going by page numbers in the magazine, is on page 41, and it's called New Italian Voices. And one of the New Italian Voices, who is a young author also from Milan, or in Milan, she's called Nadisha Uyangoda. Now, she's also on video, but again, she's had a phenomenal success. Just in the last few weeks, she's featured in most Italian newspapers and had lots of reviews for this very outspoken and very, very good essay, which we have had translated by Alex Valente. It's called, in Italian, L'unica persona nella stanza, nera nella stanza, the only black person in the room. And Alex Valente is also our resident called Italianist. Catherine Gregor started up this column for us on the European Literature Network called The Italianist, where she recommends books from Italian or in Italian translated into English, many still to be translated, and Alex has taken over that role. And he's half Tuscan himself. You'll see his name again throughout the magazine as he's translated quite a few of the books that we've reviewed. So I'm going to play you Nadisha's short video, and here we go.
Hello, I'm Nadisha Uyangoda, and I'm an Italian writer of the Sri Lankan heritage. I was born in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and then I moved to Italy when I was 6 years old. I'm a freelance journalist and a podcaster. The Only Black Person, L'unica persona nera nella stanza, is my first book, and it is published by 66th and Second Publisher. I'm going to read an excerpt from my book, and then I'm going to read its translation by Alex Valente for the Riveter magazine. Quando mia madre decise che dovevo trasferirmi in Italia perché lei non sarebbe più tornata a vivere nella terra e non tollerava l'idea di avermi lontana, avevo già compiuto 6 anni. Sono nata in Sri Lanka, nell'allora capitale Colombo, in quella che era probabilmente una calda e molto umida notte di marzo. Sono cresciuta a piedi scalzi, arrampicandomi sui tetti con mio cugino che puntava un indice insalivato verso il cielo per capire da quale direzione soffiasse il vento, prima di non manovrare gli aquiloni tra le correnti favorevoli. Ne costruiva di così grandi e calibrati che oggi non mi stupisco guardando le foto delle statue di cioccolato che scolpisce a Dubai. Chissà se lo ricorda che siamo cresciuti spalla a spalla in una strada che pensavamo fosse il mondo intero, che sarebbe potuto rimanere l'unica cosa che conoscevamo del mondo intero. Mi ero ritrovata a essere l'unica persona nera in un gruppo di bianchi che si preparava a discutere di politica e multiculturalismo. L'unica persona nera nella stanza in Italia è destinata a rappresentare tutto ciò che è minoranza. E non serve a nulla che ti affanni a spiegare che un nero italiano di origini africane è diverso da uno di origini indiane, o sudamericane, o cinesi. Sì, perché in un mondo di bianchi e neri, gli orientali non sono certamente bianchi. When my mother decided that I should move to Italy because she would never return to live in her homeland and couldn't stand knowing I was so far away, I had already turned 6. I was born in Sri Lanka in what was then the capital, Colombo, and during what was probably a warm and intensely humid night in March. I grew up barefoot, climbing on roofs with my cousin who would stick a stuck-on finger into the air to figure out what direction the wind was blowing before we could maneuver our kites between the vast currents. He used to build them so big and so colorful that I am not surprised today as I look at the photos of the chocolate sculptures he creates for a living in Dubai. I wonder if he remembers we grew up almost joined at the hip on a street that we thought was the entire world, that could have remained the only thing we knew in the entire world. I have found myself the only Black person in a group of white people about to discuss politics and multiculturalism. The only Black person in the room in Italy is destined to represent everything which is considered minority. You gain nothing by trying to explain that a Black Italian whose heritage is rooted in an African country is different from one whose heritage is Indian or South American or Chinese. Yes, even Chinese, because in a world made of Black and white, East Asian people are most definitely not white. A non-white person in a group of Caucasian people is purely and simply a Black person. That was the reading from The Only Black Person in the Room, in Italian, L'unica persona nera nella stanza. It is a memoir. It's my story, and it also tells the story of other Black Italian, of other people of colors in Italy, and it describes a racialized society here in Italy, and it would be fantastic if it could be translated into English.
So now we have another great London author and champion of Italian literature in England, and Giorgia Tolfo. Now, Giorgia, tell us a little bit about yourself, and I know you from the Festival of Italian Literature in London, which you helped start, and I think a number of your co-founders are here today as well.
I'm always scared to be asked what I do, because I do many things. I do write literary criticism. I do translate, I co-organize the Festival of Italian Literature, and I'm involved in many literary events.
It's on hold for the moment, isn't it, because of the pandemic?
It is on hold in the usual way. We are doing other things. Last year we produced a podcast whose title is The Fifth Siren, and it was about Venice and global warming. And we are working on new things, hoping to be back.
Now, you come from the Veneto region, so obviously you know Venice really well. And tell us about the reading and why you've chosen this particular reading, because that's a connection there as well.
There is a connection, yeah. I've decided to read an excerpt from Nel Museo di Rem, which is a short story by Daniele Del Giudice. Daniele Del Giudice is a very, very important, I'd say, Italian writer who hasn't published too much. He used to live in Venice, and unfortunately he died last year. He was very ill, unfortunately, and so he stopped writing quite young. He was discovered by, or more than discovered, he was originally published by Italo Calvino. And
Italo Calvino is, some people may know, was also a great publisher and editor.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So he published his first novels and stories for Einaudi, which is this historical publisher in Italy. And in fact, what is interesting is that Daniele Del Giudice's first novel is entitled Lo Stadio di Wimbledon. And it's partly based in London, in Wimbledon, and it's about this famous Italian editor and publisher. So there's a connection between London, in a way, and Venice, which is where Daniele Del Giudice lived. And the reason I've chosen this excerpt is because this is probably the story, not just by Del Giudice, but one of the short stories I love the most. And I hope people who haven't read it might want to discover it or read it. And for those who can't read Italian, I hope it will be translated.
That's what we hope. I mean, we're deliberately choosing some readings of authors you may not already know. Italians may already know Del Giudice, but we don't. And I think the more we can, use a platform like the Riveter and the Italian Cultural Institute to promote these other authors and to hope that they will be translated, because there is so much out there still to publish and translate. So Georgia is now going to read Nel Museo di Reims, which is at the museum in Reims, by Daniele Del Giudice. And it's been translated by Anne Milano Appel.
Yeah. I began to love painting after I learned that I would go blind. Maybe love isn't the right word, because in my condition it's difficult to have feelings for anything external. By this time I can see up close, only up close, so close that what's left of my sight is becoming virtually a tactile sensation. That's why I couldn't choose to keep images of men and women as my final impressions, because you can't always look at people closely enough to touch them with your eyes. Anne, the young woman, approached Barnabas so quietly that he wasn't aware of it, so absorbed was he by the painting. Speaking softly, she said, Desdemona is practically kneeling at her father's feet. The father is wearing a voluminous light red robe and has a beard. He's looking at the woman sternly, harshly. He's pushing her away. Two other figures watch from a door in the background, standing in the doorway, frightened. The light comes from above. It falls entirely on Desdemona's face and upper body. Barnabas didn't turn around immediately. He took a few moments to control his asserted emotions. Surprise at having been discovered, the irritation with himself that he always felt on these occasions, a tender feeling towards the composed tone of complicity in the voice he had just heard. And the colors? Barnabas said, turning back to the painting. They are mainly browns, aside from the red of the garments and the yellow of the light, she told him. But isn't Desdemona's garment green? No, it isn't, Anne said, smiling. She looked at Barnabas and looked at the painting. Then she went on in a different tone. Or maybe it is. Oh, yes, it's green. Barnabas continued standing in front of the painting until the girl said, Let's go on. And they moved along to the ensuing galleries. In this way, Anne completes and perfects the erroneous images that Barnabas forms of what he cannot see, or she fabricates them, detail by detail. It cannot be said that she is lying for the sake of lying, or because the situation offers her immunity from possible discovery, and there must surely be a moment, albeit brief, in which she herself is fully convinced of what she is saying, when she herself clearly sees what is not in the paintings, what only Barnabas' desire or imagination has produced, and makes it her own, and is with him in this at least. Was there really a caption on the boat? Was there really a stand of bamboo reeds in the background behind the figurine? And the unfurled scroll presented to the cardinal, did it really contain what she said? I feel like I can see them. At first I'm not sure, but when I hear her voice, when I sense her gaze turn from the painting, it all seems just as she says. As soon as she stops talking, however, the first image I had, my image, comes back to me, and then I think that there is no caption there, no bamboo stand, no basilica plan either. But then again, in the end, what difference does knowing whether they were really there make? What does it matter if I remember these paintings as they are, or as I try to see them, or as she describes them to me? Who can assure me that I'll remember them individually when the darkness becomes absolute? Who's to say that they won't merge into a kind of blurry, fused image that will very slowly fade into the past? What's important is now. What's important is here. I want her to go on talking. I want her to describe other paintings to me. I want to understand if this elusive sensation I have about what she says and what I'm not able to clearly see somehow corresponds to what's true.
Thank you, Georgia Toffa, very much indeed. Now, we have another great friend of the European Literature Network next, and of the Italian Cultural Institute. We have none other than the director of the Italian Cultural Institute in Paris, Diego Marani. And Diego Marani has published a lot of novels, a lot of books, and many of them have been published and translated into English. But we have something quite unusual, which is his latest novel in Italian. It's called La Città Celeste, and it's about Trieste, and it's not yet been translated, and it hasn't yet got a publisher. So we're also hoping that somebody will pick up on this, because we have the first ever reading. Diego's going to read in English, which is wonderful, but the translation has been done by a friend and colleague of mine called Barbara Ricci, who is Italian. She lived in Rome for many, many years as an interpreter and translator, but not of literary fiction. And she translated this for us, for the magazine, because that's what we like to do, is to open the door to anyone who wants to try something new. And I think you'll agree it's the most wonderful, wonderful translation. Diego has also written on page 103 of your Riveter, he's written a very interesting essay. It's called, the title is A Snapshot of the Italian Cultural Mind. Now, if that doesn't tempt you to read it, I don't think anything else will, but it's a quite extraordinary essay. Whether you agree with him or not, that's up to you, but I think you'll find it fascinating. So now you're going to hear Diego Marani. He is speaking from Paris. He hasn't got COVID, speriamo, but he couldn't be here tonight.
Hello, my name is Diego Marani. I am the director of the Italian Cultural Institute in Paris, and also a writer. And I'm going to read you a passage from my novel La Città Celeste. In English, it would be The Celestial City. Arrivai a Trieste la prima volta una luminosa mattina d'ottobre. Dopo un lungo viaggio nel grigiore della pianura, il treno era sbucato di colpo fuori dalla nebbia e sotto di noi era comparso il mare. Luccicava immobile, traversato nella lontananza dalla sagoma fumosa di qualche nave. La rupe a strapiombo sulla ferrovia rosseggiava d'un fogliame autunnale che dilagava in boschi fitti appena la roccia si apriva sull'altipiano. Nei passaggi più angusti il treno fischiava per annunciarsi e lo sferragliare dei vagoni cresceva di intensità. Il cielo limpido dava più nitidi contorni al paesaggio e da una curva all'altra una sempre nuova visione ci appariva della città che si avvicinava. I'm going to read you now the translation of this passage of my novel, translated by Barbara Ricci. The Italian edition is by La Nave di Teseo. The first time I arrived in Trieste was on a bright October morning. After a long journey through the grayness of the plain, the train burst out of the fog and the sea appeared below us. It sparkled, motionless, in the distance the smoky silhouette of a ship passing. The sheer cliff above the railway was reddened with autumn foliage, which spread through dense woods as the cliff opened onto the plateau. In the narrowest passages, the train whistled to announce itself, and the rattle of wagons grew in intensity. The limpid sky made the outlines of the landscape clearer, and at each curve, a new vision of the approaching city appeared before us. I was left in the compartment with just an elderly gentleman who had a restless gaze and had done nothing but stare impatiently out of the window for the whole journey from Venezia Mestre station, where he had got on. He was wearing a crumpled old-fashioned suit, grey, just like the long overcoat he had never taken off. When the first houses began to parade in front of the windows, he pulled his large suitcase from the luggage rack and headed towards the exit. I followed him, hauling my backpack onto my shoulders. Only then did I notice that he was crying. At times, he hid his face, but he couldn't stop looking at the city, which was opening below us, street after street. He glanced around him, his eyes shiny and anxious. Soon, the other passengers waiting to get off also realized he was crying, and everyone looked away. It is unsettling when a man cries. It doesn't arouse pity as it does when it's a woman or a child. A man's cry is more like a whim, a weakness. Instead of consoling him, one would rather punish him. For 30 years, I have not been back. For 30 years, I have not seen my Trieste, he murmured with a broken voice, twisting and rubbing his hands. They were rough, worn hands with the stubby fingers of a laborer. Once he got off, he vanished into the crowd of the station, leaving a trail of sadness in the joyful light of that arrival, which for me was instead a landing place, a dizzying start. That scene stuck in my mind, and today, after such a long time, I still recall it with a shiver. In that man's eyes, there was the immensity of destiny, the regret of a life already spent, and that morning sun was its last glimmer. I didn't think one could cry for a city, but back then I didn't know that cities are like women. One can fall in love with them and never forget them. Thank you for listening, and I do hope that the whole of this book will be translated and that you can read it all in English. Goodbye.
So thank you to Diego Marani, and we have another live author, and somebody also I've wanted to meet for a long time. She's quite hard to reach, though, Livia Franchini. She's a busy woman, and we're very lucky to have you here tonight. It's really great to meet you the first time, too. I mean it, not just because you also wear red lipstick, but that is pretty crucial. Now, Livia, I know quite a lot about you from hearsay, but tell everyone else.
What are people saying?
In the best possible way. You teach at Goldsmiths.
I do, yeah.
And you've published your first novel already. You've got a second novel coming up in English. So you've actually already got there.
Well, I write in English to begin with, So it's actually really lovely to be able to read a bit from this book because it's lived a double life. It was published in the UK, a shelf life, and then it was published, so it was published in late 2019. And then the Italian version, which was translated by Veronica Raimo, came out in the spring of 2020.
So you didn't even translate your own novel?
No, but that's mostly out of exhaustion and out of the fact that Veronica's probably a better writer. And I had the sort of the luxury to choose.
So have you ever written in Italian?
A little bit. I moved to London in 2007, so I was 20. So that's fortuitous.
So how's your Italian now? Do you need?
It's all right. It's mostly Tuscan dialect, and I think it's Italian, but it isn't. So I've lost the capacity to write in Italian if I ever had it, and possibly to speak, but that's a weird glitch because Tuscan people think we're speaking Italian, but we're not.
You do think you own Italian,
Yeah.
I think.
But yeah,
Well, that's because of our friend Dante, I think, more than
and all those
anything.
guys.
But anyway, so you're going to read from your first novel, which is in English, written by you in English, and translated into Italian. But you're going to read it in English. So there we are. That's a first as well.
Here are some things I know about weight. A pound of feathers weighs as much as a pound of bricks, but a pound of bricks is easier to carry. A pound of flesh may be used as payment or taken as forced retribution. A pound cake is made by using a pound of 4 ingredients: flour, eggs, butter, and sugar, which actually means a more exact name for this cake would be 4-pound cake. Most things you buy in the supermarket come in a standard shape, a fixed weight, which makes them feel familiar. For example, a 1-litre bottle of sparkling water, the brand you like to drink, weighs exactly 1 kilo. The weight of the measure of oats you enjoy in your morning porridge fits perfectly in the palm of my hand. The weight of your soot jacket on my shoulders when I get cold because I've forgotten to bring a jumper is exactly the same weight as the end of that night, which is felt in the knees in the light grip of a migraine nudging at my temples and is easily assigned to a specific hour between 11 and midnight, just before the last train home. The weight of your arm draped across my shoulders when we are laying in bed and you're falling asleep, and how long it takes for that weight to turn into a different kind of weight. The dead weight of your deep sleep is the weight of sleep itself. Without it, the notion of sleep is emptied of meaning. You have left an indentation of exactly the size of your body in our bed, but your body is unavailable to substantiate its weight, which is why I'm laying here at 4 a.m, sleepless. I've imagined a life without you sometimes. I did it absent-mindedly after a fight when we'd made up, but my throat was still clenched with resentment. Or when the cute guy at the supermarket rushed to discount the flowers early because he knows how much I like them, that I always buy myself a bunch on a Friday. You didn't like it. You said cut flowers made you think of death. It was just another one of those things you said. You said so many things all the time. A life without you just struck me as a life of empty quiet. Yet emptiness is the opposite of what I am experiencing. It isn't an emotion exactly, just a physical sensation of tingling. I'm thinking about the parts of my body I never think about. The backs of my calves, the tips of my elbows, the shells of my ears, the interstices between my toes and fingers. And I'm able to locate it in the middle of my chest, electricity traveling along the tiny wires of my nerve endings. It jolts me up, and I stand for a moment stunned. Then I start blindly towards the kitchen. With each slow step, something, or what is packed inside, starts spilling out like I'm punctured somewhere. Go on, I tell myself, go on, move, walk. So I walk. I walk with my shoulder to the wall so that nothing can grab me in the semi-darkness, but my arse hits the phone stand and I look and my hips disappointed because I put on weight and my belly sticks out like I'm pregnant. A sharp pain folds me in two and my hands shoot to the back of my back to soothe the period pain. I realise that your and my baby will never be born and I have to lean against the wall while white grief washes over me and I feel the oldest I've ever felt. I think of how often in the hospital my patients ask for water and how many times I poured it into a teacup, cool from the tap, and held it to their lips. My dry mouth meets the edge of your Choose Life mug, and as cold water trickles down my throat, the noise within me finally stops, and I know exactly what the problem is. I've never been a person alone. Thank you.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. And that book, Shelf Life, is available in all good bookshops. And your second novel's coming out this year? Next year. And then another one after that. So, Livia Franchini, thank you so much. Now, one wonderful section of the magazine is on poetry. We have 8 Italian poets, original poetry, translated into English, many of them translated by Cristina Vitti. Now, Cristina couldn't be here tonight because she has COVID. She sends her regrets, but we would like to honour Cristina and all the work she has done in translating a lot of wonderful Italian poetry. She and Stephen Watts, who many of you will know as well, they're both advocates of poetry and translation in this country, and they have contributed to the section that starts on page 140 of our poetry section in the Italian Riveter. And this section was also edited by Anna Blazak, who is the managing editor on the Italian Riveter and in the European Literature Network. Anna and I have worked together for nearly 10 years, and she's also a poet herself. So this is to honour all of them. I'm going to read one of the poems myself that Cristina has translated, and it's by Mariangela Gualtieri. This is Adoration to the Word One by Mariangela Gualtieri, translated by Cristina Vitti. I love you, word, sign, sound of our human self, placed inside a throat that so very slowly was formed for you to speak a thing exactly, to speak water, bread, grass, earth, all of the world's names, and also the unseen, fear, dream, nostalgia, abandon. Down so many eras, in the tight knot of the animal, a sound was struggling, through grunt, through breath, death rattle, drool. How it reared this strange form that we were, how it strained to finally come to say, I love. I forgive you. I think. I am. To speak the entire world from crevice to star. I love you, word. Out of a lust for you to speak you, all of the face burst through the snout and was made clear field, was made countenance and lips, and the breath, the delicate bellows to support you and blow you out into the world's wide open, where you fully become what you are and fly, ring out, and never stay, but go free. I love you, word. I don't know if you are human invention or if it's us who come from you. I don't know if you hold the call, the priming of a world beyond the world. I don't know if it's true that you sing the universe, that you support it. You are crowned in your silence. You are the most perilous of all gifts. It's an amazing poem. I think you'll agree, stunning poem. There are many more stunning poems in there in the magazine. So we also have a stunning poet, Laura Fusco, who is going to be speaking to us. She's actually created a little video of her own for us. So we'll see what Laura's come up with. She's, as you know, she's a very well-known Italian poet, and she's a stage director as well. She's performed internationally, including in the UK. And 2 of her poetry collections are available in English, Liminal and Nadir, and they're both published by Smokestack Books. And Laura is going to introduce her own readings, so enjoy the next bit.
Blue days of a blue a man threw himself into a grey water of cloud to swim to the land that, like a modern mirage, has been there for 15 days. A gleam of light, a cloud, and not so fair, and what it changes again and again, opens new salvations and new dangers. An endless color reflects another. In the middle, a small tossed cloth of colors. That man, that woman, the child wandering. They vomit fear into the water. It hurts as a pain. While somewhere else, the sky is asleep, the nights are light, so heavy that a spiral of smoke descends. Fog still clings to the trees. The women, writes the reporter, try to make up for the atrocity the children have witnessed. They try to get them to sleep, to wash them, not make them cry. To be normal and to do normal things. That is both women's fortune and their revolution. And from normal things comes the future, even here. Il cielo è addormentato, la luce della notte, così pesante che una spirale di fumo, invece di volare, si incurva verso te, scende. La nebbia e fumo rimane attaccata agli alberi e crea nuove forme, nuove ombre. Le donne, scrive la reporter, cercano con dolcezza di compensare le atrocità che hanno visto i bambini. Cercano di farli addormentare, lavarli, non farli piangere. Essere normale e fare cose normali è la fortuna e la rivoluzione delle donne. E dalle cose normali passa il futuro. Anche qui. No wall will do it. When they have to keep still in a square meter of fever, they close their eyes and imagine. When they have a stomachache, nightmares are frightened, they close their eyes and imagine. In between what they imagined and reality, there's a space they know and run towards without stopping, even when they don't eat, and cry or play or are just afraid. No wall will do it, even if their struggle is imagined, more real than any power, more than any person who writes. They have suicidal instincts, nightmares. They consider violence normal. They learn it. Someone dies or get lost in their imagining, like the pastor on their mountain crossing, because to imagine is their crossing. And that's the reason. There's the word. There, the only storm is the doubt that dreaming might not have power over what they feel and touch. But they leave the illusion to the ground up that a camp is more real than the story they are writing. Eating sleeping, waiting for, thinking. Nessun muro ce la farà. Quando devono stare fermi in un metro quadrato di febbre o sulla branda, si annoiano, chiudono gli occhi e immaginano. Quando hanno mal di pancia, gli incubi, paura, o sono arrabbiati, si girano dall'altra, chiudono gli occhi e immaginano. Tra il loro immaginare e la realtà c'è uno spazio che conoscono e percorrono senza fermarsi, anche quando non fanno nulla, anche quando non lo sanno e piangono, o giocano, o hanno solo paura. Nessun muro ce la farà, anche se la loro lotta è impari. Il loro immaginare ocra, d'oro, rosso, rosa, fucsia, arancio è più reale di qualsiasi potere.
Thank you to Laura Fusco for making that film for us. But also I want to point out that on page 152 of the poetry section, there is a review of Laura's 2 books of poetry. And they, so Liminal and Nadia, both published by Smokestack Books. And they've been translated by Caroline Maldonado, who's a poet and translator living in the UK and in Italy. Now, Caroline, as you may know, is also, she's done lots of translation, but she's also a well-known poet of her own. Her own collection of poems, Fault Lines, has just been published by Vol Books. So thank you to all of them. Now, we have our another, thankfully live person, Paolo Nelli. Welcome to Paolo. Now, you will know Paolo.
Thank you.
Because Paolo runs, he's a writer, but he also runs something which is very important to the Italian Cultural Institute, which is the Italian Reading Group.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, tell us a little bit about that and about your writing as well, because you've published a lot.
Yes, I published quite a few books, yes, and I hope that I carry on publishing again in the future. But about it's a book club. If you speak Italian, you can be part of it because there are books in Italian and that I choose, and then we discuss with many readers. And I do here actually here we do via Zoom. To be honest.
Do it on Zoom. I mean, that's the reality, isn't it? But it actually has made it possible for me to listen in occasionally, which I've really loved. I mean, it's so good for my Italian. So I don't understand everything, but it's wonderful, and the books you choose are wonderful too.
Yes, also because I teach Italian and Italian culture at the King's College London, and it's so weird, but yes, we are so used to speak to people on Zoom, and then just I mean, I feel sorry for the student, but this is the reality now. So and also I'm a writer myself, as you said, and the last 2 books were the last one. The title was so the title of the last one was.
I love it. Writers forget their own books.
No, but I was trying to think because they're in Italian. So is Il Terzo Giorno, and the book before. Was called Trattato di Economia Affettiva, and I mention it because it's somehow related to the author that I'm going to talk about, and so in English was Treatise on Economy of Feelings. Yes, exactly, something like that.
Great title.
Yeah.
It sounds almost as though Primo Levi should have written that. It's that kind of title.
Because no, it's not really. But it's actually the book that I'm talking about is a seminar on youth. So my title somehow resembles it because this author Aldo Busi, and I'm going to read something about him, is from the same region that I came from, and is not on the list of the magazine. But I choose to say something about him because. He was really extremely influential for my generation of writers. I discovered it when I was in my 20s and at university, and it was not just the way, the style, so rich, so powerful, so precise, was really as a persona. I mean, he's really was a kind of I discovered later when I started publishing book and I met many writers of my generation, he was a kind of intellectual father for us, I have to say. Now he's a bit, less known than in the past. And also he went a lot on television. So when I was talking to other writers, whom I organized the festival, the field, not many of them read Aldo Busi, and I think because of the television, because many Italians know him as a character in television, and television, we know, eat everything. Even if you're a great writer, you became a character in television. But it definitely was so important for me, but not just for me, for many writers.
Aldo Busi has been translated, but it's quite a while ago. I mean, there's nothing, and there need to be more translations, don't there?
Yes, I think that, but if you think that not many Italian writers are translated in English, we can say that at least six books by him were translated in English. And I have example of two of them, because my reading will be very short, so I can tell something more about because he wrote 3 types of books: novels, and then a type of book that we can call like a handbooks, to guidebooks, just to practice as to become a perfect gentleman, or a perfect gentlewoman, or a perfect singles. And I mean, I laughed so much when I read the book, and it's so deep, so intelligent, and also so funny. And also, he wrote a third type of book that they are travel books, but definitely in a very unconventional way. This one, the title is the first travel book that he wrote. The title is Sodomies in 11 Points, and probably I'm
not your usual travel book.
No, it's not your book, but it's very interesting because this one probably, I think I'm not wrong, is the last book in Italy accused of
blasphemy.
Not blasphemy. How do you say? Sorry. No, indecency and yes, and obscenities. Yes, exactly. And I mean, a judge called Aldo Busi in court, and Aldo Busi was very happy because he could follow the steps of Pasolini and the steps of Oscar Wilde, and then he went there, of course, and without any defense, then himself and literature. So it was really kind of gift that the judge gave to him. So anyway. And
I think we need to hear from this. So Paolo Anelli is going to read from Aldo Busi. Yeah. Thank you very much.
The opening of this book is really extremely tough to read in Italian, and then in English would be even more tougher. And I choose to read the beginning, the opening of a seminar on youth, because it's the first book ever published by him. Is a kind of an homage. And I don't know, honestly, if Aldo Busi wrote bestsellers. Maybe he did, but definitely he wrote long sellers, okay? And some of his books you can even buy now, even in Italian, even if they are quite old. So the beginning is this one. What remains of all the pain we thought we suffered when we were young? Nothing, not even a memory. The worst, once it has been experienced, is reduced with time to a slight smile of astonishment. Astonishment that we had been so upset by so little. And I, too, thought things were fatal, which then turned out to be lethal. Only because of the boredom that comes over me when I think of them. In pieces, or in one piece, don't we go on living equally split? And this suffering of times gone by seem to be words so distant from us today that it seems improbable that we could have inhabited them in the past.
Thank you so much to Paolo Nelli. Now I'm going to embarrass somebody very much now because I finally have the opportunity to thank somebody who has been with us and been behind this project from day one, if not day zero. And that's Nicola Locatelli, who is the cultural attaché here at the Italian Cultural Institute. We are so grateful to Nicola, and I would like to give Nicola a big, big hand of applause because without you, this magazine wouldn't happen.
Thanks, Sergio.
And this is also our way of saying thank you to Nicola for all the years that he spent promoting culture in this country, because Nicola is leaving the Italian Cultural Institute in London in the summer. I know. We're all very sad about that, but there will be a wonderful new cultural attaché.
Yes, absolutely. From mid-July, yeah. Maria Teresa de Palma is her name.
Fantastic. So we look forward to meeting her, but for the moment we're going to enjoy you. And the reason Nicola has, I would say, I've twisted his arm a little bit, but I think you're very happy to be able to read this passage. Our editor, West Camel, who's edited most of our magazines, has come down with COVID this week. And in the magazine, West has written a really fantastic essay about Natalia Ginzburg. And it's on page 67 of the Italian Riveter. And so we want to thank West Camel for all the work he's done as well for this magazine. But we also want to highlight the extraordinary writing of Natalia Ginzburg, who has, in the last few years, all her books have been republished and by Daunt Books, and they've done beautiful new editions. And this particular one is really interesting, isn't it, Nicola? So tell us about this book and tell us what you're going to read.
It is, yes. So Voices in the Evening was written by Natalia Ginzburg while she was in London, because she moved to London in 1959. Her second husband, Gabriele Baldini, was appointed director of the Italian Cultural Institute, so this very place. And to be honest with you, she kept complaining about London in her letters to Italy, about the food, about the weather.
It was 1959.
It was 1959, yes. But, yes.
The weather hasn't improved. The food has, though.
Yeah. And she wrote this book here in London, as well as other very highly regarded non-fiction pieces, such as Small Virtues, Le piccole virtù. And I think that's really a coincidence that we are reading from this book today.
Yes, no, it is wonderful. And so Natalia Ginzburg, she wrote so much, novels, short stories and essays, and she was great friends with Calvino and Pavese, a really, really great writer. So it's wonderful that we're including her in this evening of riveting readings. So thank you, Nicola.
Thank you. I had gone with my mother to the doctor's, and we were returning home by the path which skirts General Sartorio's wood, and the high wall covered with moss of the Villa Bottiglia. It was October and beginning to be cold. In the village, over our shoulders, the first street lamps had been lit, and the blue globe of the Hotel Concordia illuminated the deserted piazza with its glaucous light. My mother said, "I feel a kind of lump in my throat. It hurts if I swallow." She said, "Good evening, General." General Sartorio had passed us, raising his hat above his silvery waved hair, a monocle in his eye, and his dog on a lead. My mother said, "What a fine head of hair he has at that age." She said, "Did you notice how ugly the dog has become? I have a kind of vinegary taste in my mouth now, and that lump hurts me all the time. However did he discover that I have high blood pressure? It has always been low with me, always." She said, "Good evening, Gigi." General Sartorio's son had passed us with his white Montgomery over his shoulders. He was supporting on one arm a salad bowl covered with a napkin. The other arm was in a plaster of Paris and in a sling. He had a really horrid fall. I wonder if he will ever recover the full use of his arm, said my mother. She said, I wonder what he had got in that bowl. One can see that there is a party somewhere, she added. At the Terences, very likely. Everyone who goes has to take something. Nowadays, many people do that. She said, but they don't invite you, do they? They don't invite you, she said, because they think that you give yourself airs. You have never been to the tennis club either. If one does not go about and show oneself, people say that such a person is giving himself airs, and they don't seek one out anymore. Now, the little Bottiglia girls, on the other hand, everyone invites them. The other evening, they danced at the Terences until 3 in the morning, and there were some foreigners there, a Chinese man even. The little Bottiglia girls were always so called in our family, although the youngest girl is now 29. She said, perhaps I have a little hardening of the arteries, have I? Do you think? She said, shall we have any faith in the new doctor? The old one was old, of course. He was not interested anymore. If one told him of anything wrong, he immediately said he had the same trouble himself. This one writes everything down. Did you notice how he writes everything? Did you see how ugly his wife was? She said, couldn't we sometimes have the miracle of a word from you? What wife? I said. The doctor's wife. The one that came to the door, said I, was not his wife. She was the nurse, the tailor at Castello's daughter. The tailor at Castello's daughter, how ugly she is. And how was it she had no overall? She will be his servant, not the nurse, you see. She had no overall, said I, because she had taken it off as she was just going. The doctor has neither a maid nor a wife. He is a bachelor and has his meals at the Concordia. A bachelor, is he? My mother, in her own thoughts, immediately married me off with the doctor.
It's great. Well, that was from Voices in the Evening by Natalia Ginzburg, and that was first written in 1961 and translated by D.M. Lowe, and they've been republished nearly all the books, I think now, by Daunt Books. So thank you so much, Nicola, for that. And by the way, we after this evening, there'll be drinks and little snacks upstairs. We have 2 more readings, and these are, again, really, really special readings. As you know, the past few years have been really tough. We've actually published 3 riveters in the pandemic, which is, again, an achievement, I think. But, we've had Brexit, we've had the pandemic, and we're publishing this Italian riveter during a war in Europe. We're in the middle of a war in Europe. And this has really inspired the readings of these last 2 really wonderful readers, and writers and translators themselves, and Paolo Grossi and Tim Parks. So the 2 last readings are from Paolo Grossi and Tim Parks, and they are also on video. And they've chosen these particular readings. They'll introduce themselves. But so first of all, Paolo Grossi, who many of you will know for so many reasons. But Paolo is also a great inspiration for us. He's been very supportive of our magazine from the beginning. He runs the new website, new portal for translation called New Italian Books. It's a really major innovation. And if you want to find out about grants and so on, and what the Italian government and Italian organizations, publishers are doing for Italian literature, in translation, do go onto the website. It's called New Italian Books. And Paolo is the driving force behind that. It's in English, Italian, French, and soon to be in German. Paolo has chosen to read from Primo Levi, from the periodic table. And there's a review of a new biography of Primo Levi on page 73 of the Italian Riveter. But first of all, I'm going to let Paolo read. And you'll find out why he's chosen this.
Hello, my name is Paolo Grossi, and I'm the editorial director of New Italian Books, a website devoted to the promotion of Italian books abroad. I'm going to read the opening pages of Potassium, a short story by Primo Levi from his book The Periodic Table, translated into English by Anne Goldstein and published by Liveright. I've chosen to read this text because it seems to me particularly topical in these days when the threat of war is looming over Europe. In January of 1941, the fate of Europe and of the world seemed to be sealed. Only the deluded could still think that Germany would not win. The stolid English did not know they had lost the match and stubbornly endured the bombardments. But they were alone and were suffering bloody defeats on all fronts. Only someone who was willfully blind and deaf could doubt the lot reserved for Jews in a German Europe. We had read Feuchtwanger's The Oppenheim Siblings, smuggled from France, and the British White Paper arriving from Palestine, in which the Nazi atrocities were described. We believed half of it, but that was enough. Many refugees from Poland and France had landed in Italy, and we had talked to them. They didn't know the details of the slaughter that was unfolding under a monstrous veil of silence. But each was a messenger, like those who hastened to Job to say, I alone escaped to tell you. Yet, if one wished to live, if one wished in some way to take advantage of the youth that reign in our veins, then remained no other recourse than willful blindness. Like the English we didn't know, we banished all threats into the limbo of things either not perceived or immediately forgotten. One could also, in the abstract, throw off everything and flee, migrate to some distant mythical country, choosing among the few that had kept their borders open. Madagascar, British Honduras. But to do this required a lot of money and a fabulous capacity for initiative. And I, my family, my friends possessed neither. Besides, seen from close up and in detail, things did not then seem so disastrous. The Italy around us, that is to say, at a time when people didn't travel much, Piedmont and Turin, was not unfriendly. Piedmont was our true native land, the one where we recognized ourselves. The mountains around Turin, visible on clear days, and within bicycling distance, were ours, irreplaceable, and they had taught us hard work, endurance, and a certain wisdom. In Piedmont and in Turin were, in other words, our roots, not powerful, deep, extensive, and fantastically intertwined.
And thank you to Paolo Grossi as well. He's been such a major force and champion of Italian literature for us. And so is our next and final reader as well, Tim Parks. And there's somebody else I've known a very long time. I interviewed Tim Parks, I think the very first time at the Hay Festival many years ago. And he has written himself many novels, many works of non-fiction. He's also translated some of Italy's greatest writers, and he's continually translating. He has translated most recently for Penguin Classics, he's translated Cesare Pavese. And he's going to be reading from Pavese, The House on the Hill. And Tim has also chosen this final reading for the reasons of where we are now in the midst of this war in Europe. If you turn to page 61 of the magazine, you also see another reason for reading more about Tim, because he's given us a wonderful interview on translating and on his life in Italy. He's been living in Italy now over 40 years, I think, himself. So our final reading then is from Tim Parks, and he will introduce it himself.
I'm Tim Parks. I'm speaking to you from Milan, where I've lived for many years. I'm going to read to you from a novel by Cesare Pavese called The House on the Hill, which was published in 1948, 2 years before his suicide. It's a book about war. And I chose the passage, I suppose, because this is a period when we were inevitably thinking of war. And certainly when I translated the book, I never imagined how topical it would seem so shortly after its publication. It's published by Penguin Classics. So here we go from the last pages of The House on the Hill. Cautiously, I walked up to the bend and saw a big lorry. It was stopped empty across the road. A stream of petrol darkened the tarmac, but not just petrol. Beside the wheels at the front, there were bodies stretched on the ground, and as I got nearer, the petrol grew redder. A few people were on their feet, some women and a priest moving around, and I saw blood on the bodies. One, in a grey-green camouflage uniform, had fallen on his face, but with his feet still up on the lorry. Blood and brain oozed from under his cheek. Another, a small man, had his hands on his stomach, looking up, yellow, filthy. Others were twisted, slumped face down, skin livid. The ones stretched out looked short, bundles of rags. One had jumped onto the grass to the side, shooting to save himself. Stiff now, on his knees against the barbed wire, he seemed alive, blood trickling from his mouth and eyes. A wax boy crowned with thorns. I asked the priest if the bodies were all from the lorry. Brisk and sweating, the priest looked up. He was in shock and said, "Not just this lot, but up ahead, the houses were full of wounded men." "Who attacked who?" "Partisans from up there," he said. "They've been waiting for days." "This lot hanged 4 of theirs," yelled an old woman, crying and fiddling with her rosary. "And this is the fruit," the priest said. "And now we'll have savage reprisals. From here, right up the Belbo Valley, it'll be an inferno." They'd lain in wait behind 2 big rocks where they couldn't be seen. None of the fascists had escaped. The partisans had used the other lorry to take away prisoners. But first, they'd lined them up against a wall and threatened them. "We could kill you the way you lot do, but we'd rather let you live and wallow in your shame." People were making up bundles and pushing animals out of the sheds. No one dared sleep at Due Rocce. Some were climbing up to the sanctuary, trusting in the place. Others headed elsewhere, anywhere. The important thing was to get out of here. Next day, these roads and tracks would be a death trap. The priest had run into a house. A man was dying. I hung around among the bodies, not daring to step over them. I looked at the bell tower up on the hill and realized I wasn't going to get home before tomorrow. An instinct pulled me back toward the road. A desire to put the innocent village, the Tinella and the railway between me and the coming tempest. Without looking down at the ground again, I set off, past the peasant with his oxen, still waiting, gaping by the cane thicket, kept straight on, and an hour later, with the day already cooling, was climbing the last hill, beyond which I would see the Tinella Valley. So the war has caught up with me. And now it catches me every day. In any event, I've seen the nameless dead, the fascist dead. They woke me up. If someone you don't know, your enemy, has that effect when they die, so that you stop short and you're afraid to step over him, it means your enemy is someone, even in defeat. And that after shedding his blood, you'll have to placate him. You will have to give a voice to his blood and justify its shedding. Looking at the war dead is humiliating. This is not someone else's business now. You don't feel you happened here by chance. You have the impression the destiny that brought these men down is forcing us to stand still and look at them, to fill our eyes with them. It's not fear. It's not the usual cowardice. You feel humiliated because you realize, you see with your own eyes that you could be in that dead man's place. It will make no difference. And you owe your being alive to his bloody corpse. That's why every war is a civil war. Every dead man resembles the living and demands an explanation. There you are. Thanks very much, everyone, and goodbye.
What an extraordinary selection that is. I think you'll agree that you've had what we call the cornucopia of Italian literature tonight. Thank you so much to our living readers, to our live audience as well. It's been extraordinary having, I know that, we're only getting used to this again, having real people in the audience with us, but it is such a joy to have you here, and it makes such a difference to have you here. We've been doing so much on Zoom for the past couple of years, not just on Zoom, there are other platforms, but mostly on Zoom. So it's great to have you here. And so thank you very much to our all our Italian readers and to all of those who took the trouble to make those films as well, because I think you'll agree they're really special readings. Take your Italian Riveter with you. It's free. Tell all your friends. It's also online, as I say, on the European Literature Network website. And stay tuned for the next Riveters, which will be in spring 2023. This time we have a Spanish Riveter coming up in spring 2023, and we also have an Austrian Riveter. So, stay tuned, as I say. Thank you very much indeed for coming.